Hello and welcome to the Marketplace Risk virtual event series. I'm Heather, event specialist here at Marketplace Risk. Today we welcome Catherine Porter from Prove, Chelsea Hauer from Sitter City, and consultant Augie Kennedy. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplaces and digital platforms successfully navigate complex trust and safety, risk, compliance, and legal subject matter so they can avoid distractions in order to focus on launching and scaling successfully. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to access hundreds of hours of content, including recordings from previous conferences and summits, on-demand virtual events, our platform podcast, and to subscribe to our newsletter where we keep you up to date on everything, including the 2024 Marketplace Risk New York Conference and the 2024 Marketplace Risk Global Summit in London. If you are interested in sponsoring or speaking at the conference, you can visit our website to access sponsorship opportunities and find the call to speakers form. We would love to see you there. Before I hand things over to today's presenters, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. First, this is a virtual event and is being recorded. So the recording will be available to you to access on demand at the Marketplace Risk website. Second, all attendees have listening capabilities only and are otherwise muted. And third, submit your questions via the control panel, and if we have time, we will answer as many as we can. If we do not get to your questions, feel free to email us at info@marketplacerisk.com, and we will get your questions answered. With that, I will turn things over to Catherine.
Hey, everyone. I'm joining from California, so good morning and good afternoon to those who are joining elsewhere, particularly our friends on the East Coast. So I'm Catherine Porter. I'm the Chief Business Officer for Prove. And with Prove, we look at all of the ways that consumers can protect their identities online. And we stay ahead of the fraud risks that they face as we increasingly live our lives online. So I'm excited about this presentation today. This conversation really with Chelsea and with Augie. We've got some great experts who are available to us, and we will dig into some of the critical elements of fraud and risk that they face and learn together about ways that we can keep our consumers safe. So with that, Chelsea, Augie, I feel like I, as a consumer, am experiencing more and more tricky situations online with, as I'm a part of sites like Sitter City. I have a young son, so for babysitting, as I'm living my life online with social media and with digital marketplace apps, I am increasingly concerned, even being a digital native, increasingly concerned about the ways that I interact and potentially interacting with bots and deepfakes and impersonated communication. So what are you all seeing on your platforms as experts, and where are you staying ahead of it? And talk to us a little bit about that so we can learn.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll say for us, it's just a lot of bad actors who we have two sides of the marketplace, right? So on the sitter side, the bad actors want to gain access to children for nefarious reasons. And then on the parent side, they want to scam providers or sitters. They see them as a great market for scamming, honestly. So we've actually noticed a shift in tactics with scammers trying to communicate with providers that we're working on getting ahead of. We also see sitters attempting to impersonate others through the IDV process, which again, also we're trying to take proactive measures to mitigate. So those are, the two, I would say, main things that we are seeing and what we're doing on our end.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Chelsea. And what it really speaks to is that looking at the companies and the industries that I've been working with over the past year, they're very, very different than what you're working with over there in Sitter City. And the manifestation of the problems might look different, but the ultimate goal fairly similar, right? So if you're a subscription service, you're seeing account takeovers. You're seeing basically if you are a content-based service, whether you're streaming or whether you're like digital publication, you're seeing basically anything you can to scrape that content, resell that content, potentially share credentials and impersonates maybe a family member, which is fairly benign, all the way up to full-on pig butchering schemes, which used to be the exclusive realm of online dating sites that are now starting to bleed into these other marketplaces as well. Basically anything that allows for multi-side communication, now people have the opportunity to basically plant the seeds with these high volume, low success attacks. And that's in large part thanks to the technological improvements that we've seen. I don't necessarily think, to your question, Catherine, that there's necessarily anything new that we're seeing. I mean, deepfakes is a little bit new, but deepfakes is really just like an escalation of falsification of document identity, really, on a certain state. So we see a lot more than we had been seeing in the past, and we see it in not only much larger volumes, but also coming from areas that we wouldn't historically have been focusing on either.
Yeah, I think, when I think it's probably because just the amount of time that we're spending online, and we, spend more of our hours living our lives online. But I feel like it's the combination of more of my communication, more of my outreach to friends and to workplaces, just as an average consumer. I live in an online world where I'm thinking about, how do I bring on a pseudonymous identity for myself? How do I preserve some of my private information from not being out on the web? These are great practices for living our lives online. And yet it does feel like in the last year or two, certainly as we face the opportunities for fraud in AI, it's becoming increasingly challenging and, a real corporate strategic objective to protect consumers from this type of fraud. So when we think about bad actors, what are the ways that you feel you're implementing systems that are working to protect your consumers?
Yeah, I mean, for us, when looking at the scammer side or the parent side of the bad actors, they used to inundate our platform. Honestly, it was a regular discussion that we saw among the sitter community. And when we started to pull data and see how much manual process we were implementing in taking care of this, we put our foot down and said, we have to do something about this. So it's certainly not something we want to get back to. We were able to build a proactive approach to remove these users prior to them even communicating with anyone. And it's basically gotten our scam activity down to almost 0%. I mean, we're never going to get to 0, but it's so close. So in that world, it's been, really great being proactive and trying to watch the trends that we're seeing and what we can do to combat that before they become a problem. And then as far as bad actors accessing kids, on the platform, we've been consistent with being proactive again. It's kind of like a mantra, being proactive and transparency. You'll hear me talk about that later too. With our tactics to mitigate the risk of those instances occurring and regularly working to keep that up. So currently it's not really a big issue, but it could be if we don't stay ahead of it and we don't keep this proactive mindset.
What about for you, Augie?
Gosh, one of the challenges is that we always have to balance how we're going to allow people into the system, because you don't want to cut off your ecosystem completely. There are a lot of things that you have to do early on that basically allow customers to onboard onto your platform, that allow, in a marketplace, you need buyers, you need sellers. You don't want to cut your arm off to spite your body. So much for the nose and face reference. But but the thing is that there's not really an easy way to balance this, especially now, because there are just so many different vectors at the disposal of these threat actors. And there's no one solution that I've found yet that can identify all of these potential vectors and allow you to notice them earlier in the funnel. And that's really what I think we would benefit from generally at every company that I've worked with over the past few years. So we really could use something like that.
Yeah, I hear you, Augie, and what I'm seeing with customer conversations, particularly as I focus right now on two-sided marketplaces. And we're living our lives online there, and we're living our lives online so that we ultimately create our lives offline. And so by meeting online, then we are in somebody's car, we meet online, and then we meet somebody in a bar. We meet online, and then we're selling our home furniture in our driveways face to face. So this kind of peer-to-peer online that meets a very important and potentially high risk activity offline that is part of your life. And I feel like we're entering the era of the verified checkmark. Like, are you who you say you are? And is there some easy method to understand that when there's a green check mark or a blue check mark beside your name on either side of that marketplace, that there's verification? And we can, even if you're acting pseudonymously, which a lot of us do now, we have the information necessary to authenticate identification.
That's right. But to that exact point, do you stay who you are? The verification check mark, that's great. But if I get my account taken over, it's somewhat less great, right?
That's exactly right. That's why we have built something we're really proud of, is this notion of verification one time and then a passive verification that continues as we think about tokenizing identity, so that we don't, as Prove, need or hold the privacy information. We don't have PII. We match to marketplace consumers so that we can tokenize for our customers their consumer information. And then that token, we continue to passively verify as we see that token move around online, so that we are working to reduce the friction that I think a lot of two-sided marketplaces are afraid of. And if we add more step-ups, if we add more questions to our consumers, or to on the supply side, to the drivers, to the sitters, to the shoppers, to the whomever, we are going to reduce the activity, the engagement on this platform, and ultimately we'll see a decrease in transactions. Yep. So I think there are those like Prove in our industry that are thinking, okay, how do we help make that as light touch as possible the first time, such that then that first time verification becomes passive verification that continues with these consumers, no matter if they're rider or driver, or if they're driver and then they're also a mom looking for a sitter. As you move around the web, there is a passive check mark that continues to verify and helps provide that layer of trust and safety to our digital lives online. On that note, there are a lot of entrenched stacks of software and of practices that really come from, regulatory compliance and from legal requirements and just good practice that's been established. Those methods have been longstanding in trust and safety, but where are their weaknesses in kind of traditional trust and safety practices and methods, particularly because of the environment we're in today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it used to be that it was fairly difficult. The barrier to entry, you talk about startups having certain barriers to entries. The barrier to entry to be a convincing forger or to be a convincing fraudster used to be significantly higher than they are now. And it's not purely the fault of AI. It's you look at the many advancements in technology. So once upon a time in the late Cretaceous period, I studied film, and to understand editing, to truly understand film editing at a granular level 15 years ago is so much different than it is today, where anybody with an iPhone can basically make a convincing deepfake in 30 minutes. You know, like that used to be incredibly hard. You'd have to mat, composite, understand how to do all of that. But we've built software that takes a lot of the technical skill out of this. So now all you really need are bad intentions. If you have bad intentions and an iPhone, sky's the limit, you know? So the other challenge is, so that makes it extremely difficult to, it makes it much harder for the people reviewing these or for the systems in place to detect these anomalies on the documents or on any kind of verification confirmation. Makes it much more difficult for them to spot these aberrations. And the second thing is that there are still a lot of companies out there, many companies out there that focus a huge amount of their verification on manual verification. So if the people who are reviewing these documents aren't necessarily trained to spot these irregularities and maybe artifacting around the facial area, they might miss some of these potential opportunities to nip it in the bud. And then the second area in which there's a weakness, and it kind of surrounds the manual process. Don't get me wrong. I think the manual process is incredibly invaluable. We'll speak about that later when we talk about high value, high risk transactions. But when you're just looking at the volume, and this is where AI can help, when you're looking at the volume that you can execute these attacks at scale, it's very easy to overwhelm a manual review team. And a manual review team that might have been afforded the opportunity to spend, 2 minutes per case, now has the opportunity to spend 10 seconds on a case. And they're never going to operate with as high a precision as they would otherwise be able to. So those are the key weaknesses that I see right now.
Yeah, I think, feeding into Augie's point, some bad actors, few of them historically, have always been good at forging documents. With the rise of AI, it's made that a little worse. So AI is actually making it a lot easier for people to forge documents to the point that trained professionals are having a hard time telling the difference. We even had a forged document come through for review, and I've been looking at these things for 8 years now, and I had a hard time telling that it was a forged document. There was telltale signs, and obviously we figured it out. But AI, I think in this realm can weaken but also strengthen, because again, to Augie's point, when you have people doing that manual review, they can have a hard time figuring out, is this legitimate, is this not? But AI can help us to identify if it is or not, because it can get to a level of review that a human can't. So it's kind of good and bad in there, but that's, I think, a main weakness from the traditional methods that I've seen come through.
Yeah, that sounds right based on the conversations that I've been having with customers too. Another aspect of this verification, and particularly around documentation, is then prioritization with, it's easier, it's more straightforward in the e-commerce world, where you're thinking about size of transaction and money at risk. And so let's first talk about what methods are being used when it's in e-commerce. And I think, Augie, you're best suited to talk about that. And then I'm just curious from both of you, when our traditional methods have also been built because of their expense, because of the step-up nature of them, can be cumbersome for users, for people. How do we then think about, excuse me, I'm sorry. How do we then think about, if it's not a transaction size, but it's the size of human engagement online, what are the different ways that we think about that? But first, Augie, if you could talk to us a little bit about the e-commerce world, that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my answer is going to be super obvious to everybody. But the reality is that you want the highest level of scrutiny, whether that be manual, whether that be even redundancies in your checks, for the highest risk, highest value transactions. I worked for a marketplace that was paying out potentially $100,000 every month. Like, you could make that was the limit. You could make $100,000 a month. Now, that was obviously the 5 standard deviations. Now it's like 3 standard deviations, 4 standard deviations above the mean. But the reality is, we had to protect those payouts. You know, the people, the strategy there was, let's understand that we might lose, we might miss the mark, and we might set ourselves up for failure on lower value transactions, the 100 here, $500 there, because we could survive that. And we have preliminary systems in place that were fairly good at checking these. But once you get up to the 5-figure, and especially once you hit that 6-figure threshold, the question now becomes, to what extent can we be absolutely certain that this is the person that we're paying and that this transaction is merited? Because that's where you want to put all of your ammunition, really, is to try to secure those transactions. But of course, you know, that's going to be significantly different than a situation like Chelsea's, you know, where there's like actual human risk. But in this case, you also have to put yourself in the seat of the person who's standing to be paid these large sums of money. You know, I don't know about you. I would love to have $100,000 right now, right? And if you're asking me to take a video of myself and saying, yes, I am this, and here is a code word that I'm holding up in front of the video, like if that's what I have to do to get $100,000, I'm very willing to do that. And if it's going to be a stumbling block, well, maybe start looking at those other, you know, associated signals and see whether there may have been something going on with that transaction that you could learn for next time.
Thanks, Augie. And then I suppose the second part of my question that I was teeing up, Chelsea, it would just be great to hear from you, you know, as the human engagement piece, getting it right on your platform is essential. And so, you know, when you think about all of the ways that you're implementing best practices here, keeping people safe, but also keeping your platform high engagement with low friction, how are you all handling it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as investment and gaining that investment, you know, a lot of times what we're trying to do is implement something that hasn't happened yet. So it can be really hard to gain, you know, the investment in for example, from the executive team. But the way that I look at it is, if we prevent just one child from being harmed in the entire grand scheme of things, you can't really put a dollar amount on that. So that's something that we do focus on. And I, you know, can also see our platform, at Sitter City really benefiting from document verification in that aspect and in that world, because if people are fabricating their documents, obviously there's a higher risk of children potentially being harmed. And that's something that we look at. We don't currently do that, but what we do in place is, you know, share information on our website that helps to create a trusting and safe experience for our users. We have the Trust and Safety Center, where we're very transparent, and transparency is a huge thing for us, and that's a motive that we live by. You know, we let parents know kind of things that they should be doing or could be doing during the interviewing process, the hiring process, and then even after the hiring has happened. Go with your gut, encouraging sitters and families to reach out to each other for documentation and to review that documentation, be comfortable that it is legitimate, investigating if there's a complaint, and then conducting identity verification at onboarding. And then again, you know, right at account creation, and just because it's really important to make sure, especially on the sitter side, that we know who you are, because you're going to be caring for children. We also monitor platform activity. We've been able to actually catch a lot of bad actors through content moderation. And so, for example, user-to-user messaging, even we've noticed, and we use historical data a lot, where we notice certain trends in how bad actors behave that we can then take action on as well. And then we also prioritize balancing transparency. So, for example, we have a broad community. We're accepting of everyone on the Sitter City platform. And we have, you know, lots of different groups of types of people. And one group in particular that I like to keep mindful and be mindful of are the transgender group of folks, where They may want to list their preferred name, the name that they go by, their name that is them, and that's their identity. But we have to use their dead name on the back end for screening purposes. So just, we'll talk some more about this a little bit later too, I think, but keeping that balance of their privacy in addition to, what we need to do as far as keeping people safe on the platform.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think about that all the time. Having worked at Meta for a long time and thought, just being in the social media world where I choose on certain platforms and have chosen for years to be pseudonymous, to try and give myself a layer of privacy and safety as I have more and more of my life that I'm posting online, right? And I think it's true for so many of us in the world. There are plenty of great reasons why you'd be using different names than, I believe, a dead name. Does that mean like the name that's on your birth certificate?
Yeah, that's their given name, basically.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, my birth certificate name being different from my online persona, just for this particular reason, no matter how you come about it, for safety and for privacy. So with that, that was a great segue, I think, to talk, Chelsea, if you can talk about the methods that you're using to assess users, give us a little bit more granularity on assessing users in a world where we're also allowing for a private persona or different types of personas to be the online name and identity for our users.
Yeah. So, I mean, currently we do require a level of PII in order for sitters to onboard. And we also will likely move into the parents' world of doing that as well sometime soon. We haven't seen much drop off, and we think that's just because our method of communication is transparency. We believe people would rather know when they're being screened. It feels less violating than if you're screening somebody without telling them or looking through information that we're being fed on the back end. And so, on the parent side, we do some light screenings, but we're able to keep scam activity low with proactive prevention process, where we look at other points of risk of onboarding at the onboarding point, and behaviors thereafter. So just making sure to maintain monitoring user behavior is a huge indicator for potential points of risk that don't impede on personal data and information at all. And then, yeah, again, we're just trying to be really mindful of those users who have preferences. I spoke about the trans community, but again, like to your point, there are parents who, for whatever XYZ reason, would prefer to go by a nickname or a different name publicly because it's a public website and anybody can see this information. And so, I'm very mindful of it, making sure that my children's names are not out there. And if I do, I might use little nicknames for them. But again, it's just that balancing act of privacy and then also needing to make sure that the users are safe and that we're screening appropriately the information that is needed to be screened.
Makes sense. And Augie, as we talk about a theme that's coming up for us, I think, is we need to, as technology people and as trust and safety people, continually think about the ways to protect against these increasing risks while also keeping the experience low friction and a platform where users feel like they can, happily engage without being bombarded with questions and repeated questions about their identity. So how do you foster trust? What best practices have you seen in fostering trust with users as we have advanced our identity verification platforms?
I mean, you're exactly right, though. Like, the bottom line is people just don't want to be harassed all the time. You don't want to incessant. You don't want to basically, if Netflix suddenly required the level of scrutiny that my Bank of America account would require, that's kind of a problem, right? But the reality is that at least when you're dealing with reasonably moderate sums of money being passed around, there's a level of expectation among the users. They actually want you to have some scrutiny. If you go through a completely frictionless experience, let's use Bank of America. If I went through a completely frictionless experience and it's like, oh, yay, we think we know you, we've seen this device, but we're not going to ask you anything else. I'm gonna be like, wait a minute, are you really protecting my assets, right? So there are levels of, there's a level of customer satisfaction that's associated with some friction. The question is really, where should this friction come in the customer journey? You know, and I think that that's one area where a lot of companies, some get it very right, some get it very wrong, is understanding what the true, like, essential moment in the user journey is that would require that bit of verification. I'll give you an example. Uber. I used to really like Uber. Used to use it all the time. Still do pretty often. But the reality is, pretty often now, in the past month, I have to enter 2FA every single time I want to open Uber. I open Uber, it doesn't recognize me, even though I haven't changed phones, I haven't changed email addresses. It's not like I got some sort of complaint against me, you know, everything's looking good, but I have to do this extra step every single time. And at the end of a long night, I don't necessarily want to do that. I just want to press a button and get my ride. And that's been actually pushing me over to Lyft a little bit more. And that's an example where I think Uber got it wrong as to when to impose this level of friction and who to impose it on, right? So anyway, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, and what I'm experiencing as a consumer is, you've made a good point that kind of with the stakes of the information that you're protecting. So the stakes, you can engender trust with consumers by adding more identity and trust friction into the process because it is your money at stake.
Mm-hmm.
The stakes are lower, I think, for all of us, even though, you know, we've talked a little bit about how the risks can still be extraordinarily high when you're taking the risk of meeting online and then living offline. But the stakes, because we also have inherent trust, implicit trust, kind of the original 5 stars of behavior, rating systems and so forth, there is a little bit of productized trust that we build into our platforms today, where the stakes are a little bit lower and we can adjust the identity verification, the trust practices against the risk inherent in that marketplace. And instead, I think the industry is also in the early stages of this, you know, it's looked at blunt instrument versus scalpel. And so if there are ways to kind of help trust and safety experts look at the risk inherent in the marketplace and adjust, is probably a great strategic consideration for teams inside these marketplaces. I think I'd love to talk to you all about, do you think about verifying your users, and are you looking at continuous verification as an opportunity to help users live their lives online without, you know, with the size of the risk in mind, so that you're accordingly putting the right amount of friction in the process?
Yeah. I mean, realistically, Catherine, I think you have to. So at least at some point, I used to work for an online tutoring platform. It was a marketplace that basically matched students with tutors and had them conduct lessons. And what you would find regularly is that you'd have a student who had all of their credentials verified, and there would just be a very simple ATO. You know, their password was used at night. They used the same password at the tutoring platform that they used at Nike. Nike has a breach. You know, now everybody's password is available on Nike. Blunt, mass attack, try to get into the tutoring system. Threat actors get in there and start conducting lessons with shill accounts to basically drive up their earnings. That was a tactic that we saw over and over and over again. And the reality is, it happens to people every day. You know, when, you know, calling out X, I guess it is now, when X recently, when within 1 week of X becoming X and the trust and safety team being disbanded over there, I received 3 emails. 1, new login from a device. 2, you just changed your email. 3, you just changed your password. And that was the last time I ever used that site because it completely lost my trust. and there wasn't additional scrutiny put on the identity layer. So the good thing is there aren't that many excuses not to have some kind of protection layer there, because there are so many vendors right now. I mean, let alone for a second the fact that you can instrument your own signals, device, IP address, platform. Are you seeing a significant change in these? You know, are you seeing an update to the method of payments? Are you seeing updates to the password in the email? That might require that step up in scrutiny. The reality is, there are certain risk considerations, and they're going to be different between businesses. You know, that online marketplace tutoring marketplace is going to look different than what I'm sure Chelsea's going to talk about that she sees in Sitter City. And you just have to understand as a business where those high risk points are, have signals surrounding them, have some sort of telemetry surrounding them so you can understand when things look aberrant, and then step up as needed. And that's really how you've got to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, we don't have a continuous process that's ongoing, but we do understand that is very important given today's landscape. Receiving reports out there that there's people who are using or paying others to open accounts for them or on their behalf, and then having the account. I guess it's not really an account takeover per se, because they're paying these people or saying, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to use the account. But just keeping this in mind, because we have seen that happen. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Obviously, it's very important to know who's coming into your home to watch your children. And so we have other ways of monitoring that help us to identify situations outside of the traditional identity verification process. We rely a lot on historical data, and again, that content moderation, where we've seen, you know, the person's profile says their name is Sarah, and then they're messaging people saying my name is Maria, and we're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so we've identified points where we need to be mindful. And we've found that too many verification points can cause friction for our users. So making sure to find that sweet spot of the most impactful point of identity verification is what we're striving for. Where should we be, like, invading people's privacy to make the site safer? Where's the best spot for that?
I really appreciate, and the best spot for that piece, having come up in my career in technology companies, particularly consumer tech companies, where that UX design is so well A/B tested now. We have so many ways to understand exactly where there is engagement and drop off. And so do either of you or both of you have input on what you've learned about desirable UX as we address these problems that we need to take accountability for on behalf of our users?
I mean, if you look at the authorization flow for most of the sites today, first of all, federated login is great, and people tend to love that. If you can use federated login, you should do that. If you have,
can you describe quickly, Augie, what federated?
Yeah. So basically, it's simply, do you want to sign into this using your Google account? Because then the onus is no longer on your company getting authentication right. You're basically trusting that Google's got this right. And you could argue that that's passing the buck somewhat, but you could also argue that they've got billions of dollars to basically build up an infrastructure. All you need to do really is trust them. So that can be helpful. I'm not saying it should be an end all be all, but it certainly makes the job a lot easier. The second thing is that what I've learned is that you want to avoid friction as early in the process as you can. That's why I love federated login, right? It's like, get them on your platform. Then, as Chelsea was talking about, then you can monitor engagement behavior. Then you can monitor what they're actually doing on the platform and making sure that it adheres to your internal standards, which are going to be much easier to police when all you have to do is focus on that internal standard, as opposed to just the gigantic and almost unanswerable broad question of identity. So that's just what I've learned. Make the friction as late as possible.
Yeah, and I kind of to your point, Augie, about friction, that's been a hot topic of conversation regularly ever since I started my career is something, let's reduce friction, get rid of friction. And in some marketplaces, it's okay to reduce the friction earlier on in the game. Some places it's not. So I think it's also really important to understand your specific marketplace and understand the audience that you're working with. For example, at Sitter City, we're working with kids. So for us, I've said time and time again, some friction is actually good. You don't want a frictionless process. You don't want 0% drop off because then if you're at 0% drop off, you have an absolute problem with bad actors getting onto your platform. I understand, obviously, like keeping friction low helps consumers utilize the products more, those good legitimate users. So there's this delicate balance you have to strike. Finding out what is the appropriate percentage of drop off for your user base, and then creating friction that gets you to that percentage. Those are the people that you don't want on your platform anyway. And yes, there are times where some legitimate, intended users will have a bad experience, but in the grand scheme of things, it's worth it because of all the issues you're proactively preventing. And if you have a good CS team, you can resolve that conflict pretty quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I joined Prue is I feel like if we can make the important steps in verification minimally viable, and then there's technology in the background that also perseveres correct verification and can help users stay verified so that we're also helping our customers provide that minimally viable risk check experience. That's great partnership. And it's also great new uses of technology to help keep users safe online. So this conversation has been informative for me on a couple of fronts. I wrote down, Augie, I think that there's something to looking at Prove's technology in federated login as well. If we can make the federated logins continuously verified, that I think is a powerful application there. So thank you for that. Before we go to questions, regulation in this space changes obviously very rapidly as regulators, lawmakers are trying to get ahead of the deeply troubling fraud risks that exist online. What are you seeing as far as, regulation impacting your platforms and how you think about meeting increasing regulatory needs while keeping your marketplace protected and low friction?
Yeah, I can start. Anything to do with privacy. Privacy is a hot button topic right now. There's a lot of legislation that's being looked at to help enhance people's right to privacy. I know with like the GDPR being released a few years back and the CCPA over in California kind of trying to mirror that a little bit, it's starting to bleed into the rest of the US. And obviously there's other global regulations as well to be mindful of, but it can make it harder for us to protect our platforms on the back end and aid law enforcement when needed. So it's just important to keep up to date in other ways of verification outside of those processes that include PII, those personal identifying information points, just to ensure you have a way to monitor your users on the platform if or when those laws are passed. Looking into these regulations and understanding how it could weaken your process and what other things you can do to combat those potential weak points so that you have, obviously I'm always about being proactive. I think I've mentioned that a million times today, but just have that proactive plan in place in the event that, something does get taken away where you were using a screening process so that you can maintain the integrity of your platform.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely. And I think, you touched on pretty much everything there. So I'll just talk from the financial side specifically. Most of the vendors that safeguard against fraudulent transaction account takeovers that involve money, they rely on certain levels of what they would call proprietary fingerprinting, which is basically it's an amalgamation of 150 different factors. Many of those key factors being potentially protected, depending on how legislation goes. So I would think that pretty much any vendor right now that uses any form of tokenization that incorporates potentially PII should have alternate methods, at least on the back burner, in place in case they need to switch some of those parameters out.
Yeah, I mean, that's another area that I was really attracted to when I looked at Proof's technology. I spent a number of years looking at online identity where we were potentially going to use blockchain as, the immutable stamp of identity and activity. It's just that the blockchain methods are having a hard time scaling with consumers. And so the fact that Proof has, tokenized identity that does not also hold PII. So we use telephony signals where we bind identity to phone numbers. 90% of the adults in the US have a tokenized identity with Proof. And we can do that by never taking the privacy information from our customers so that we can help our customers preserve their trust relationship with their consumers and can layer in Proof's technology to provide an additional layer of trust. That's the piece of it that I think is advanced, where we think about, how do we help the customers use tokenization to understand their own customers as they're moving across their marketplaces? And then how do we also use that tokenization to provide a level of ideal trust and safety to regulators as they're concerned about the use of privacy information? Just really quickly, I want to close the topics with trends that you're looking at in the next year or two that we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I've noticed a uptick with regular re-verification. I think that's something that we've talked about a lot today, and it's something with that verified check mark. There's a lot of other discussions around, again, like I mentioned earlier, people creating accounts on behalf of others and then allowing that person to utilize the account in their name. It's just going to become something at some point that everyone's going to need to do to make sure the integrity of your platform is maintained, and then the safety of your users is maintained. So keeping an eye on that, and again, trying to understand the best points of that action to be taken.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. I think when we look at generative AI can do a lot of good, can also do a lot of bad. But the bad that it's done so far hasn't really been all that horrible yet, because it's still not as sophisticated as it needs to be in order to do very horrible things. So I'm interested as to how quickly it will develop, how quickly image generation software will develop, how quickly video generation software will develop in the next 12 to 24 months. I think that we could be at a potentially scarier position 2 years from now if we were to revisit this topic.
Yeah, I, as far as trends, definitely see CEOs talking about trust and safety on their platforms. And I think it's because of this rising concern about how fast defrauding can happen as we look at new technology. AI is not new, but I think the ways that you can defraud with AI are definitely becoming more advanced, and it's happening really rapidly, and we need to get ahead of it. So to that end, really excited to be in New York with Marketplace Risk next week to announce Proof verified users, which is effectively this check mark that I've been talking about, where we tokenize the identity and verify the identity and then continuously monitor it, so that we really are working in marketplaces in conjunction with our customers to provide this minimally viable but maximally important fraud check and preserve safety in the face of these increasing risks. So it's been fantastic to be able to talk to you all from your places of expertise and your vantage points today. Thank you for participating. I know we have a few questions, and so Heather, do you want to moderate the questions piece, or do you want me to go ahead and read off?
You can go ahead and read them off.
Okay, great. So we have had a couple of questions come in. There's 4 questions here. Kevin's asking, going back to some of the document review that we talked about, we have automated document authentication. Why also use manual document review?
Yeah, I mean, automation is really great for certain documents. You know, if you're trying to authenticate whether or not a professor taught at a certain school in certain, you know, in a certain window and validate those, in my experience, automation isn't nearly as accurate as it would be for, you know, is this driver's license legitimate? You know, it really depends on what you're trying to authenticate.
Yeah,
Chelsea.
I would agree. I would agree. I've definitely seen circumstances and situations where we have automation processes in place right now for certain types of documentations, like Augie was saying, driver's license, things like that, where the machine got it wrong. And so having that human element, I think in any type of automation process is always going to be necessary. It's not going to be as involved, but I think it's still very important to always have that element when needed.
Thank you. And then Kevin's also asking, you know, just in the era of AI and how AI meets potential fraud risks, are the barriers to bad code, malicious activity lower?
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, it would have been hard for me to generate 100 fake user agents like a year ago. You can literally just give the parameters of a user agent and it will just generate 100 very convincing user agents for you. And that's just a very basic instance. But yeah, Kevin's exactly right. Like, you can do a lot of bad now, even if you barely know how to code.
Yeah. There's another, I mean, in that vein, Rajesh asks, the policies, validations, or controls to prevent bad actors from even being onboarded onto the platforms? It's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I think Chelsea's going to have a really good answer for this, because to be honest with you, most of the companies I work for, we don't really do a whole hell of a lot up front. You know, we let people come onto the platform and then we wait until they engage. In most cases, we wait until there's some level of engagement to actually either leverage one of our vendors or leverage our own in-house monitoring.
Yeah, for us, it's a lot of data review. So we've reviewed, I mean, we have 20 some odd years of historical data where we can see points of, we can monitor bad actors that we've identified as bad actors on the platform, and we can see certain specific points of risk that come out of that. And from there, we kind of we've created our own monitoring, like proactive monitoring model, where if so many points of risk are prevalent in somebody as they onboard or right after they onboard, they're flagged for review, and the team is very well versed. You want to make sure your staff is very well trained in what to look for and what to pay attention to, but they know what bad actor behavior or indicators look like from that historical data. So that's kind of mainly how we've taken our proactive approach. Obviously, also in other worlds, for example, we utilize Family Watchdog, which is a sex offender registry, to screen everyone's information at the time of registration and continuously thereafter. So just, again, I think it comes down to your specific platform and the points of risk that come with your user interaction. And for us, having sex offenders on the site is a no-go. So that's something that we want to proactively monitor. So just, yeah, understanding that with your specific platform.
Fantastic. Yeah, I appreciate the way that Prove is also adding in, kind of similar to what you were saying, Chelsea, and the gradation of risk and bad actorship. You know, we look at everything from, are people frequently changing phone numbers that might indicate burner phones being used for identity? Where is that frequently changing phone number also tied to a consistent phone number? The human inside the bad actor. We look at bot or not in assurance levels. So we're also, able to provide kind of a gray verification on, these are the areas when you look at, stores of PII, where this set of data, this set of personal information may be fraudulent and maybe, more bot activity. So I appreciate again, the theme of this talk has really been like maximum protection, minimally viable friction on the platforms. And that's, one of the ways that we continue to push ourselves technologically to provide that for our customers. We're going to close here so we get everybody out on time. And I just want to thank you again, Chelsea, Augie, for your expertise. Heather, thank you so much for having Prove facilitate this today, because there are a couple of ways. If you're inspired by also the way that Prove is solving these problems, you can follow up directly with our marketing team after the webinar for more details. We will be at Marketplace Risk in New York next week, and we'll be on stage with Uber talking about their rider verification program that we are collaborating with them in order to keep their users safe. So thanks again for the opportunity, and we look forward to more discussion in the future.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, check out our marketplacerisk.com to access this recording along with the past recordings and to subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date on all events and happenings. Thank you guys for a great discussion today, and I look forward to seeing most of you in the coming events.
See ya.
Thank you.